following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. The Comfortably Zoned Radio Network presents The Gall of the Man. And now, the galling man himself, Ralph Zig Tyko.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am the man with the gall, the Gall of the Man, and it's nice to be here, Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, and across the moat from Oakland, in the northern part of what I consider to be the best state in the Union. But I'm prejudiced. I've lived here like 40, 50 years now. Was forced out this way in the Air Force and stayed gladly and made roots in the East Bay in the northern part of the state. And I decided to name my podcast The Gall of the Man. I'm answering all the questions today for my guest, who is new to the airwaves, a Renaissance man. Let me introduce him first and foremost, Jeff Kallman. Welcome to The Gall of the Man and the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. How are you,
Thank you
Jeff?
very much, Mr. Gall.
Yes, well, I've been called that all my life. I hear that in the background, The Gall of the Man, as I'm walking out of someone's office or whatever. And, it just fit. So what can I tell you? But you and I are both refugees of the Bronx. My grandparents lived up there. I was born and raised in the city and lived in Queens, raised in Queens. But my grandparents co-raised me, and I was from Valentine Avenue. Where were you from in the Bronx?
I was on Webb Avenue off Kingsbridge Road.
Oh, the next stop down from Bedford on the D train. Am I correct?
That is correct indeed. Also, the next stop down on the number 4L. We go back a long, long way, as they say. Great memories of that borough for a number of reasons, not the least of which were their parks. I should be in radio. I'm so clear. Oh, they had some lovely parks.
The best. I've been all over the country and live in a place that has great parks. So just from Mashula Park to it just goes down the line. I wonder if you, like my co-host on Bronx Roots on this network, David Hubler, are familiar with the Harris Field. Do you remember Harris Field at all growing up?
I remember it vaguely. I probably have a more vivid memory of the Polo Grounds than Harris Field.
Okay, all right. As you may or may not know, I'm an avid New York Giant baseball fan. I was 11 when they were taken from me, and I too have early memories of the Polo Grounds.
I have been a Met fan since the day they were born, and that's where I first saw the Polo Grounds.
Okay. Well, I became an original Met fan as well, so I don't know what to talk first. Let's just talk the experience of being at the Polo Grounds. Can you recall your first time as a kid and just what it meant?
It was in 1962. It was the Mets against the Pirates, and I remember being rather intrigued by the fact that, among other things in that park, the box seats were cordoned off by dangling chains. I'd already seen ball games on television, but I had yet to see field boxes. You couldn't tell on television, but seeing the field boxes separated by chains was quite a sight.
I do. That is a memory that I would not have been brought up in my head had you not mentioned it, but that was true. And I didn't really know what the chains were for, but you know, you go in. I think they closed the chains around you, I guess. Or
they weren't provided for fans to chain whip the inept Mets. We were too busy laughing to want a horsewhip to chain whip them.
Laughing/crying, because
well, you have to admit, we had Abbott and Costello on the mound, the four Marx Brothers covering the infield, the Three Stooges covering the outfield, the Harlem Globetrotters on the bench, and the Keystone Cops in the bullpen, and the manager was really Charlie Chaplin, and the coaches were Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd. There's no other way that team could have played that season.
Oh, what is your vivid memory of the Mets as they were in that season? What is what would be a microcosm of their ineptitude for you?
Shakespeare wrote a play about it. It was called The Comedy of Errors.
And Jimmy Breslin wrote a book based on something Casey said. Can't anybody?
And he misquoted, and he actually got the phrase wrong. What Stengel actually said, and this happened after he spritzed about Chris Cannizzaro.
Casanero,
being able to Canzaneri, like the prize fighter.
Right.
And he was riffing on Cannizzaro being unable to throw out Dodger base runners, unlike what Stengel thought he was going to be able to do. And then he said, I look up and down and I say to myself, can anybody play this here game? Breslin flipped it around a bit. And it probably sounded like it made that much more sense if you had seen the 1962 Mets.
Yes. Wow, they were inept. Let me tell you my microcosm of that season. It was June 12th, and I'm hanging around the schoolyard, the park. I want to go to a doubleheader. Can't find anybody to go with. For the first time in my life, I go to a game alone. I bought box seats, and it happened to be the game. Well, first, I'm getting ahead of myself because this is worth telling. Joe Pignatano, in batting practice, hits a weak ground ball foul to the third base box seats where I happen to be sitting, first row. I reach over, I pick up the ball. It's not technically a foul ball, not technically. It's the only ball I've ever gotten in the major leagues in my life. And I go back to my seat, or I sit down or go back to my seat, whatever it was. An usher comes up to me, and he says, listen, he says, there's a kid in a wheelchair, and I want to give him a ball. Do you mind if I give him yours? And what I'll do is try to replace it with a bat. He said, try to replace it with a bat. I said, to myself, it's good odds I'll get a better. He's going to get me a broken bat, which he does. And it's a Kenny Hubbs bat. And obviously, the Cubs are playing the Mets in a doubleheader that day. And I get the bat, and I felt terrific about that. I've got a major league bat, broken bat, and I sit down and I watch the game. The first game, Lou Brock comes up and hits a ball in the center field bleachers of the Polo Grounds. Now, 12, maybe.
I remember the game well.
Right.
It was the
he
game
muscles
where
up 150 pounds of him, and there were 12 other guys who did that, maybe at the most. Joe Adcock.
Actually, at the time, he was only the third to do it.
Really?
The previous one was, yes, only 4 men have ever done that in the Polo Grounds, and one of them was not named Babe Ruth. The first one was Luke Easter in a Negro Leagues game in 1948, I believe it was. Joe Adcock of the Braves did it, I think, in 1953. Then it was Brock. And then the next night with the Braves in town, Hank Aaron did it.
the very next night. Really?
The very next day, the Braves came in and Hank Aaron hit one to just about the same spot where Brock hit his. And the funny story about the Brock homer is that apparently Brock was still young and green enough to think that when he saw the second base umpire giving the home run signal twirling his finger, Brock took it to mean the umpire was telling him he had a shot at an inside-the-park homer. He didn't see the ball go out. He apparently had no idea about it until he got back to the dugout and got mobbed by his teammates, and Ron Santo apparently barked at him, "Did you see where the ball went? I needed binoculars."
Wow. Jeff, you are as much a maven as the rest of us on this network, and more so than me. Wow, what a memory you have. Do you remember the second game of that doubleheader?
I believe that's the one in which Marv Throneberry hit a long triple, pulled up standing up at third, and then Ernie Banks called for the ball, stepped on first. The out was rung up, and Casey Stengel ran out of the dugout to argue, but he was intercepted by Coach Cookie Lavagetto, who told him, "Forget it, Case." He didn't touch second either.
That
the next man up,
correct.
The next man up is Charlie Neal, and he hits one off the upper facade over the left field seats. And before he's about 3 or 4 steps up the line, Stengel stops him in his tracks, points to first base, stamps his foot, does it at every base until Neal crosses the plate safely. He wasn't taking any chances, the old man.
That part I don't remember, but I remember being there, and again, June 12th. Wow. Jeff, where do you get this memory?
It's partially memory and partially reading. I devoured Breslin's book back in the year, and I was thrilled.
And did you read, I'm sure you read Leonard Coppett's book.
Oh, which one?
Well, the one on the Mets. It is absolutely the definitive history book on the 1962 Mets. And
I didn't read Coppett's book, but I read Len Schechter's book about them.
Another one, there was Durso wrote a great...
Jerry Mitchell had one called The Amazing Mets that covered their first 3 seasons.
Right.
And there was also Dick Schaap co-authored one, The Year the Mets Lost Last Place. He wrote that in the middle of the 1969 pennant race. And then there's Peter Goldenbach's wonderful oral history of the Mets, Amazing, which has a lot of good detail about the early years.
A book that I didn't come across until I started doing a radio podcast with Peter Goldenbach, and about a year into it, I realized that he wrote a Met book. It wasn't living on the West Coast wasn't easy in terms of knowing what books were coming out, what books there were. Didn't even realize.
Well, a lot of it is because so many of them are regional books. I mean, they are aimed at a particular regional market, but not the nationwide market. For example, I hadn't known for years that Hall of Fame pitcher Jim Bunning wrote a memoir of his baseball years until I happened to spot it on the Internet. And that's how I realized that Bunning's book was probably not put up for sale outside of where the Phillies and maybe the Tigers reached. So you have that phenomenon to deal with too when you're hunting books. But now with the Internet, you can hunt all around and find all kinds of great baseball books that you wouldn't have known some years back before the Internet because they weren't available depending on the areas.
Now, here's a good example of the Internet giveth and the Internet taketh away. We're reading so much less as a nation because of the Internet, yet the information of where to get books is so much more readily available. Isn't there an irony in that?
Yes, there is, and what you just said is very true to a big extent. And the most vivid example I can think of in terms of baseball is that between BaseballReference.com and RetroSheet, they made Total Baseball obsolete. And for years,
right,
Total
and
Baseball
a number of other
really
books.
was the statistical
There was
Bible.
a Neft encyclopedia of, they called it of sports, but it was specifically baseball. And that was so terrific. And even now,
you had
it would
that.
be...
You had the Baseball Encyclopedia, the classic one. You had Total Baseball. You had the Elias Annual Baseball Analyst. But now with the Internet, all you have to do is wait at the beginning of each season and look at all the updated statistics at RetroSheet.
Oh, you can do it daily.
Baseball Reference.
They update the
Fangraphs.
statistics daily.
Yeah.
It is great, but there are certain things a baseball fan misses about going to these books and you're browsing books like the old Neff book, for instance, and you could instantaneously go to a different page and you can thumb it, and there's something about a book that you can't really, it's not tangible.
And there always will be. Yeah, and there always will be. And thank God we still have excellent works of history and anthology coming out in hard print to keep that alive for us. I'll give you a good example. You won't find on the Internet the deep story of the Continental League attempt of the late 50s, but you can pick up the book that's called Bottom of the Ninth, Branch Rickey, Casey Stengel, and the Daring Scheme to Save Baseball from Itself, that was written by Michael Shapiro.
I would love to read that.
Yeah, it's an excellent book. You should get it, and it is still for sale on Amazon, among other places.
I will look for that.
Yes, you should, definitely. Any baseball fan should. It's a fascinating story.
It just, most people know about Branch Rickey through Jackie, naturally, and many fans know about him through inventing the farm system with St. Louis, both clubs, and many people know him as a consultant with the Cardinals later on after building up the Pirates.
And many people may also remember that Ralph Kiner once said of him that Branch Rickey was the man most responsible for the formation of the Major League Baseball Players Association because he was so penurious and devious in contract negotiations.
Whoa.
So there's a flip. There's always a flip side, and especially with Branch Rickey. And it doesn't.
Hey, let's
away
dispel a book.
History.
I think it was the former commissioner that passed away, Fay Vincent, wrote a book.
You mean Bart Giamatti?
Maybe it was Giamatti wrote a book about they played the game for nothing. You remember that book about these guys coming up, Robin Roberts and all that? Well,
that wasn't Giamatti. I have Giamatti's book. It's called A Great and Glorious Game. It's a collection of his essays, and none of the essays speaks about that.
It must be Fay Vincent's book then. Fay Vincent wrote a book. They'd have played the game for nothing, and believe me,
that sounds more like Ford Frick.
Right, exactly. But it happened to be Fay Vincent in this case. And
I actually haven't read that book.
Well, the idea I'm trying to convey is that they would not have played the game for nothing, didn't play the game for nothing, and bargained vehemently for that union. I didn't realize it was at basically as a result of Branch Rickey. But my point is...
not specifically, but Kiner was speaking metaphorically. He was using
it could have been
as a flashpoint.
George Weiss. Could have been George Weiss.
A lot of devious owners / general managers.
Right.
Things like that. Anyone who would say that they played the game for nothing in the good old days of the grand old game, I'd be willing to bet you and win big that Earl Averill Sr. would have shot you down in flames.
For sure.
And let me tell you why. When Averill attracted the attention of the Cleveland Indians, he was playing for the San Francisco Seals in the middle of a pennant race. the Indians made a deal with the Seals to buy Averill, but let him finish out the season because they were in the race. Averill picked up a newspaper and read of the sale price. I think it was $50,000. Averill asked how much of that could he expect to see. Now, I don't know if the Seals laughed their fool heads off over the idea, but they told him not a dime. So Averill said he's not going. He won't go to Cleveland unless he gets a piece of that sale price. The Seals and the Indians went crazy. Now, here comes the part that nobody would expect, considering the man involved. Kennesaw Mountain Landis, commissioner, autocrat. Landis actually agreed with Averill. He said there was nothing wrong, nothing untoward with the idea that if you sell a player, the player should get a piece of that price. Now, I don't know if the owners laughed their fool heads off at Landis, and they never put the idea into effect, but I'd be willing to bet you that if the Landis idea had been adopted, there never would have been some of the salary pressures, the escalation pressures of the free agency era, because with that, and if Bowie Kuhn had not outlawed player sales beyond a certain dollar amount, that would have gone a long way toward relieving the stresses. Now, the final upshot was that Averill and the Indians had a deal whereby the Indians paid him a $5,000 bonus, gave him a salary higher than whatever the rookie salary was at the time, and Averill went on with his Hall of Fame career. But imagine how different it would have been if baseball today had adopted Landis's idea.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it would have made the abrupt changes through the generations.
Well, what it might have helped do was if Bowie Kuhn had not outlawed player sales above, I think it was a $400,000 price. That was involving the Charlie Finley fire sale attempt. Had Kuhn not
Joe
done
Rudy
that,
and Fingers.
Yeah, Joe Rudy, Raleigh Fingers, and Vita Blue.
Vita Blue.
Kuhn made his ruling for no reason better than he wanted to stick it to Charlie Finley. But while doing that, he destroyed a critical element, not only for the richer teams, but for the teams that weren't so rich. They could still turn profits by selling players they developed and still be able to turn the profit over and continue developing until they could become competitive again. Kuhn took that away from them. What he should have done was impose the Landis idea. If he wanted to stop such capricious selling as Charlie Finley, he should have ruled that if you're going to sell a player gets X percent of the sale price, say 30%. You think Joe Rudy, Raleigh Fingers, and Vita Blue would have said no to putting dollars in their pockets that would have actually been bigger than their salaries at the time of that sale? I don't think they'd have objected.
I don't either.
If the Dodgers want to sell Clayton Kershaw for a couple of $1 million, you think Kershaw's going to object to putting about maybe $1 million in his pocket before he throws a pitch for his next team? I don't think he'd object.
Not at all. I'll tell you a story.
You
how things change for players and for the players, keeping in mind that the minimum salary of a player today
is $550,000 a year.
No, it's 500-something thousand.
550.
Oh, 550. Okay, I thought you said two.
Yes.
But yes,
no, 550,000 a year. That's the minimum.
Plus, add to that if you have 1 year of service, 1 day of service time, you have access to what probably is the best medical plan going. It's because
you do, except that when the Players Association negotiated that change in the pension plan back in 1980, they made a tragic mistake. When they redid that plan, they excluded players who had played between 1947 and 1979 for reasons unknown, and it took even a small amount of pension allowance plus the health access away from those players. Now, many of them had short careers, but many of them had also gone out there on the hustings with the Players Association to fight for the rights they ultimately won. That just seems to me to be terribly short-sighted. And as a matter of fact, there is an updated edition of a book that addresses that very issue, Doug Gladstone's A Bitter Cup of Coffee. The updated edition is coming out, I believe, on Valentine's Day.
I've had Doug,
and he tells the story way better than I could.
I've had Doug and many of the players affected by that as guests.
Yeah.
You're a Met
Doug
fan.
and I have become friends and correspondents. He's a great guy to talk to, and he tells this story far better than I could in a short podcast.
Okay,
so that book is coming out. That updated book is coming out next week.
a number of times. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he's coming up against something that is as business-like, if you want to talk big business, as hardcore as anything, and that's the Player Association.
Well, yes. Nobody pretends that the Players Association is any less hardcore than the owners, the commissioner, baseball's overall government. They're all hardcore. They're all looking to get their edge. There's no question about it.
And it doesn't
say anything against the Players Association.
Point that out. He has, I think he's Don Quixote on a certain level with this, because he's getting absolutely no positive response, and the law
very recently, yeah,
and the law's just not with him. From everything I've been able to determine.
Well, the law may not be with him, but the Players Association could change that anytime they wanted to. It would be within
their rights. But they won't,
so.
because
but
they're
not going to right now.
Endemic with them that is a microcosm of what we have going on in this country.
We've had that going on for as long as you and me have been alive.
Right, and nobody is going to give in on that. Well, you say that, of course. Social Security had to be literally forced on people, and we see how the word socialism goes over in this day and age. Part of it is anything with an ism at the end of it has to be bad. People are nuts, and they don't read the dictionary. There are two words: socialism and
forgetting the isms. There are some other proposals coming up between the Players Association and the Commissioner's Office. They're talking about, in advance of the next collective bargaining agreement negotiated, they're talking about making some changes, and some of them are actually, I think, would be good for the game, and I see that the Players Association is pushing them quite strongly too.
Do you think having a National League DH is good for the game? I'm just curious.
For years, I held out against the DH, but I had to look reality in the face. We would crucify a position player who hit 115 on a full season. But we want pitchers to keep hitting when they only hit 115 as a whole last year?
No, you're missing something that the strategy of the game. You don't want them hitting. So now there's a decision to be made. You certainly don't want them hitting.
The strategy.
So do you take him out for a pinch hitter and bring in a relief pitcher? Or do you leave him in?
You haven't.
There's so many things involved. Bunting.
You don't impede or remove the strategy. All you do is shift its focus. When you don't have to have your pitcher batting, you still have all kinds of strategic enhancements. You have better options for hitting if you think you're in a high leverage late game situation and you might be thinking about a double switch. You have better bat options to work with. you also have more enhanced options before the game or even before the series you're going to play against Team X, because you have options to shift in a combination of your offensive matchup and your defensive matchup based on the pitchers you're going to face. You don't remove strategy. All you've done is shift it around a bit.
No, actually, I couldn't
now,
agree
look,
with
we
you
all
more.
we all got a kick
That
out of it.
strategy, the shifting around that you're talking about, you're going to have the shift anyway, no matter who bats.
Then
That's
why
not
waste
the point.
Then why waste the lineup spot? If you don't have
It's
your
not a
pitcher
waste
batting
of the
ninth,
lineup spot. Why not teach your pitcher to get the ball down and advance the runner?
because unfortunately in the DH era, they haven't been doing that anymore. The
I
DH
know,
goes
because
down
there's
as
the
far as
DH
junior
era.
high
Which
school,
came first, the chicken or the egg?
And it has since the DH came in. Now, the American League is not going to get rid of the DH. We know that.
No.
The DH, do you know the history of the DH?
Blomberg, I've even had the last pitcher to throw before Blomberg.
That's not where it begins.
Harry Cowell.
That's not where it begins. As a matter of fact, I wrote about it today. One of the things I heard about the National League DH is how, quote, un-American it is. The only thing un-American about the DH is that it's an un-American league creation. The first baseball figure to suggest the DH was the owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates late in the 19th century, William Chase Temple. In the 1890s, the National League was worried about falling off fence too, and Chase Temple decided, wouldn't it be an interesting idea to have a hitter whose job it is to bat in the pitcher spot in the lineup or instead of the pitcher? Now, he came up with that idea, and the National League had a meeting on it. The DH got a 7-5 vote in favor of it, but that wasn't enough according to National League rules of the time to implement it. And then it was forgotten again until 1906 when Connie Mack proposed it after apparently he got tired of watching his pitchers like Hall of Famers Eddie Plank and Chief Bender swinging like they were using cardboard tubes. And again, it went nowhere. Now, to 1928, the National League again thought about it. Their president, John Hadler, advocated it, but the American League turned it down. The National League tried it in a few spring training games that year, but then they decided not to go with it. That's where it stayed until the 1960s. And in the late 60s, several of the minor leagues, including the International League at the AAA level, adopted the DH. And it had staying power, enough so that that's what got Charlie Finley's attention after the 1972 season, when his Oakland A's pitching staff hit a collective 165 with a 198 on-base percentage. There was only one A's pitcher who could hit, and that was Raleigh Fingers, the relief pitcher. He went 6 for 19. The rest of the American League overall didn't hit that much better from the pitcher spot. Now, we know that Bowie Kuhn usually thought Finley was about as much of a pleasure as an unanesthetized root canal. This time, Kuhn let Finley have his head. Kuhn let the American League bring the DH aboard in 1973 on an experimental basis, and Ron Blomberg worked a full-count walk in the first American League DH at bat off Luis Tion.
And there was another game that started before or would have been played, was rained out that day, would have been another DH.
Right, but it fell to the Yankees and Bloomberg.
Absolutely. And
now, in 1980, the National League got close to adopting the DH. Kuhn told them the proposal would bring it in for 1982, and that's when things got dicey, because Phillies Vice President Bill Giles had no idea how owner Ruly Carpenter wanted him to vote. Carpenter was incommunicado on a fishing trip, and the Pirates general manager was instructed to vote however the Phillies voted. Whoops. The upshot was, in that vote, the Braves, the Mets, the Cardinals, and the Padres voted for the DH. The Cubs, the Reds, the Dodgers, the Expos, and the Giants voted against. The Phillies, the Pirates, and the Astros abstained.
Whoa.
And in the case of the Reds, they forgot their own recent history because the first time the DH appeared in the World Series was 1976, And from then until the 1986 World Series, the DH was used on both sides. And the first National League DH was Dan Dreesen, the Reds' first baseman. He was named the DH for their entire World Series, and they swept the Yankees that year. And you could make a case that having Dreesen in the DH slot in that series helped that last Big Red Machine team, because the Yankees had just revived back to competitiveness and won the pennant, but they were badly overmatched in that World Series. They got swept.
But you couldn't make the case that one team uses the DH all year and one team doesn't. So there's a basic inequity, and the table is...
There is, but then in the 10 years that it was used on both sides in the World Series, it evened it out for both teams. On the regular season, the American League had the...
Why did it go back to not being used on both sides?
Well, starting in 1986, the DH was changed for the World Series to be used only in the American League Park, which gave the American League team a slight disadvantage in the National League Park.
Well, I'll tell you what.
The first
looks
American
back
League
on those 86 Mets, they didn't use the DH at all during the year, but they had about 4 or 5 guys that could be a DH, and they were so deep. They had Hojo, they had Mitchell, they had Danny Heap.
They didn't quite have Hojo. Howard Johnson was not coming into his own until 1987. He was there, but he wasn't that vital in their lineup that year. What I also remember of that World Series is that in Game 1 at Shea Stadium, Bruce Hurst, the Red Sox pitcher, had a bat. And he was so inept at it that even the umpires were laughing.
Okay.
You almost felt bad for the guy.
All right. You know what I remember about that 86 series?
Had some bench depth. That series basically turned on... The series really turned on two managers trying to outsmart each other and ended up outsmarting themselves.
Right. Stapleton should have come in. There was a Sacramento, Johnny McNamara, born and raised in Sacramento. I lived in Sacramento a number of times over the years, and he and Sacramento baseball have a terrific reputation. Dusty Baker came out of there, Larry Boa, a myriad of players.
But McNamara managing the Red Sox in that World Series, not just whether or not he should have brought Dave Stapleton in for the bottom of the 10th in Game 6, but there are several other moves that he made that were questionable at best.
Yeah. You know, here's something for you. Had Buckner fielded that ball quickly,
I can tell you what would have happened.
Mookie might have beat it out.
It would have been first and third, and Howard Johnson coming up to the plate. Johnson was on deck, and Wilson had the plate beaten at first. If you remember, Buckner was playing back at the edge of the grass, and Wilson is swift out of the box, and Bob Stanley, the Red Sox pitcher, isn't that quick off the mound. Wilson has the play beaten, and Ray Knight is the runner on third, and Johnson's coming up to hit with second and third. That's what happens if the ball is fielded.
And it's a tie ball game right there.
Mitchell came home on the wild pitch that was called a pass ball.
Right after that. Good memory.
Or was that the pass ball that was called a wild pitch?
You're an encyclopedia. You fit right in on the Comfortably Radio Zone Network. We've got Al Blumkin, we've got David Nemec, Peter Golenbach, Mark Littell. You stand up quite well, my friend.
Well, thank
How
you
did
very
a
much.
guy coming from the Bronx get to Las Vegas through Nebraska, for crying out loud, playing the blues?
Well, in the immortal words of the Grateful Dead, what a long, strange trip it's been.
All right. In a nutshell,
it was just a circumstance of life.
Okay.
I never imagined when I was growing up that I would end up living in Las Vegas and being happy in Las Vegas. But here I am.
Okay. What do you miss most about New York?
I miss the jazz clubs. I miss seeing the Mets live. I miss J.S. Crum on Fordham Road in the Grand Concourse, where you could enter at one side and come out the other side, and you could gain 15 pounds just breathing in the fragrances of the chocolates as they were made.
Yes, you're a perfect candidate for Bronx Roots. I hope you'll join us one Sunday morning.
One Sunday morning I will. Let's see, what else? I miss the low V cars on the IRT. I miss the big New York Public Library smack in the middle of Manhattan. That was one of my refuges.
Oh, with the lions.
Yeah.
Am I right?
When I was a little kid, I used to
as a
pet those
kid,
lions.
you'd go in there and have such a respect for the Dewey Decimal System and all these printed. If you had your book printed, oh my God!
When we were growing up, the internet was the Dewey Decimal System.
Right.
And we had food processors when we were growing up. You may have heard of them. They were Sunbeam Mixmasters.
Right.
With the wackiest attachments you ever saw on a kitchen appliance. My
mother had stuff that would clip to the table. It would be the
mine.
The grinder, the liver grinder, gehackte Leber. That's what she called it.
We cheated. We used the Mixmaster attachment. We were cheaters.
Well, you're younger than me. I'm an old guy, a dinosaur. I can remember.
You sound younger than I do.
Man. Pardon me?
You sound younger than I do.
I don't. You've got the voice for it. Did you do radio in your life?
As a matter of fact, I did.
Where did you do radio?
I did news radio in upstate New York and Northern California for 5 years in the 1990s. And then in Las Vegas from 2009 to 2010, I did a radio comedy show.
Really? I would have loved to guess. I did a little stand-up comedy in the 80s and 90s myself, and you make a great guest on my show. I would have loved to guest on your show.
It would have been great. Well, what I did with mine was I did it old-time radio style. I did it with sketches, complete with ambiance sounds, and anything was open for satire, including we used to do a regular routine in which myself and my two partners would kick around assorted, very odd news items, and then at the end of talking about that, I would say, well, we're not going to talk about that tonight. We do about 5 or 6 of these, and it would all come under the rubric of the things we're not going to talk about, never mind that we just spent about 10 minutes talking about them.
All right.
And we had
throw
fun
in
with
music
that.
at all?
I did. I would interrupt twice with a couple of blues or bluesy jazz or jazzy blues selections, and then after
did you ever interrupt with this? I'm just curious, but this might be something that you played once in a while.
I did play Smokestack Lightning.
Smokestack lightning.
Yes, I did.
I can't play too much of it because
I got a little more hardcore than that. I think on one show I played Robert Johnson.
Oh.
Back to back with Jimmy Witherspoon.
So you know from playing music, you know from the blues. How'd you get interested in the blues?
It started when I was 14 and I was away at summer camp. And the camp took us on a trip to Tanglewood, Massachusetts to see a concert a week before Woodstock. The co-headliners were Jefferson Airplane and The Who. We get to that concert and it was the opening act that flattened me. 5 notes out of B.B. King, and I was a goner. And I couldn't wait to get home from camp that summer, grab the cheap little Lafayette Electronics guitar that my grandmother bought me for my 12th birthday and start trying to play seriously. And concurrently, I took all the allowance my mother saved up for me over the summer, about $55, $60 it was, and I went to TSS in Oceanside, to their record department, which was the best on Long Island, better than Sam Goody, and I bought as many blues records as I could carry away and pay for.
Hey, when you say better than Sam Goody,
it had a
back
deeper
from leave
blues.
in the Air Force to go to Sam Goody to buy. I needed to buy a record by the Earls. Do you remember the Earls?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I knew Larry Chance a little bit in the 90s when I was doing radio in upstate New York. He hung around at the station where I was doing a show once a week.
Really? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Very
nice guy,
that was the
very
best
knowledgeable.
Blues. Right before Dion and the Belmonts, I had the Earls. But I couldn't get their album, and I went to Sam Goody, and I went up to the counter, and I said, I'm looking for the Earls album. Remember.
Yep, remember
and
when.
He says, oh, very interesting. Why don't you go talk to that guy over there? And I went to talk to another clerk, and he says, I was in the Earls. I can't even find that album. So I don't remember who it was. It was one of the guys. I'd recognize him on an album cover, and they're all over the internet. You can get them on YouTube.
Well, I went to TSS
but he looked at me and says, I wouldn't, if I had it, I'd keep it for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to meet the Earl. Just goes to show you that even though you're in a group, that doesn't make you. He's working as a clerk at Sam Goody's.
Well, I read a great story about Muddy Waters when his first record on Aristocrat, The Future Chess, came out, and he went to try to buy a couple of copies, and they were sold out.
Whoa.
It was his record, I Can't Be Satisfied, and he went to buy himself a couple of extra copies, and the store was sold out of them. When I went to TSS that day with my 60 saved up bucks, I came out of there with 3 B.B. King albums, including his newest one at the time, Completely Well. That was the one that had The Thrill Is Gone. I also came out of there with Muddy Waters, Sonny Boy Williamson, the Butterfield Blues Band's East-West album, Albert King, Howlin' Wolf. And I
don't think The Thrill Was Gone. Is The Thrill Gone? Was that not B.B. King? That wasn't B.B. King.
There was B.B. He had a crossover hit with it at the end of the summer of '69.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He didn't write the song. He was remaking completely a record of the '50s by a fella named Roy Hawkins.
Ah, okay.
But I got those.
Somebody else made it.
Now at the time, Chess was putting out this set of anthologies called the Chess Vintage Blues Series, and those were the Muddy Waters, Sonny Boy Williamson, Howlin' Wolf albums that I came at it with, and you couldn't find those in Sam Goody. Their blues section just was not that extensive.
You have great memories. What's Vegas like? What's the adjustment living in Vegas from a New Yorker?
You mean aside from the summertime heat?
Right.
Well,
much akin to Sacramento.
One thing Vegas has in common with New York is being a 24-hour town 7 days a week. But other than that, it's quite different. I mean, obviously New York doesn't have the casino gambling hotels, but in Las Vegas, you see all that and you partake of it here and there, but you can have a lot of fun in Las Vegas even if you don't gamble. There's a thriving music scene out here. I mean, obviously I'm part of it, but there is a thriving music scene out here, and there is all kinds of good eating out here. And the people are, by and large, friendly, civil, down to earth. I've lived here since 2007, and I have no complaints whatsoever.
Good. You're a happy guy, and a terrific guest, I might add.
Well, thank you very much. You're a terrific host.
Well,
you're a homeboy.
I'm a homie. You'll come back, I take it, and It is the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The guest is Jeff Kallman. I am Ralph Zig Tyko. So please join us again. And I have a request that I ask every now and again. If you're listening out there and if you enjoy this or any of our offerings, please do me a big solid. Box up some new or lightly used children's books and take them over to the Head Start program wherever you are. Kids need to read. They need to develop an imagination. They need to take their noses out of the devices. And they need to become school ready by design.
Bring them baseball books.
Yeah, bring them baseball books, but anything that may interest them, and you don't know what that could be. It could be rocks. It could be butterflies. But, yeah, baseball books. Bring them a lot of baseball books. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody out there for listening.
Thank you very much.
I am going to be back at you before you know it. Adios. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.